This is 8th grade 1.1 interpreting graphs. We are going to do some key vocabulary, so remember that anytime I write on the screen you're writing with me. You're doing all the vocabulary, you're doing the examples, you're also writing the guided practice with me as notes. So a bar graph, and if you look on page 3 in your book, that's where 1.1 starts, page 3 in your book, you'll see it's highlighted about the second paragraph down. It says a bar graph is a type of graph in which the lengths of bars are used to represent and compare data. So a bar graph uses bars to compare data. Okay, so you can write that down, or maybe other definitions if you want to put a little more, that's fine. The data then, which is the second word right here, data, a lot of times it can be facts, it can be numbers, it can be or other numerical information, other types of info that we're trying to represent in a visual type picture with graphs. Okay, a frequency table, what a frequency table does is it takes information and it puts it in intervals. It might take a whole, instead of making a bar graph of a whole bunch of numbers, a frequency table is the frequency of the data, how often the data happens, and it will lump it into intervals. And then you take those intervals, right there, those intervals become a histogram. Intervals are made out of a bar graph. And I think it'll be a little more clear for a frequency table in a histogram when you actually see one, which will be later on in this lesson. So we'll just keep going, and then we'll come back and talk about those. So example 1, which is again on page 3 in your book, it says volcanoes. The bar graph at the right shows the number of historically active volcanoes in 4 countries. Which country has the most historically active volcanoes? So you can see right here, you have a nice graph right here. I want to just talk a little bit about the graph. All good graphs, they have a title. That's the title. They have an x-axis and a y-axis. The x-axis is this one. It goes on the bottom. The y-axis goes up right there. Notice they're labeled nicely. We have the country, and each one of the bars has the name of a country. These intervals are consistent. These are going up by 30. It depends on the data as far as how big your intervals are going to be. So what I love about a graph is it's very visual. You can see that the one that has the highest bar right here is the answer. The one the country has the most, and the most would be the United States. So it's very evident in the data. So it says use the bar graph above about volcanoes, answer the question, and explain why you can't answer the question, or explain why you can't answer it. Which country has the most historically active volcanoes? And which country has the most volcanic eruptions in a given year? So if we go back to that graph right there, well, we already answered the one with the most. The one with the most is the United States. So that one is the tallest bar, so that one has enough. The second question though, which country has the most volcanic eruptions in a given year? It doesn't say how often they erupt, so we can't answer question B. So it's impossible to answer that question with this graph. We'd have to find some other information in order to do that. Okay, so look at their solution. It says the vertical axis, which is the y-axis. Vertical means it's going up like this. It's labeled historically active volcanoes, so the tallest bar represents the country with the most historically active volcanoes. Because the United States has the tallest bar, it is the most historically active volcano, so you would write A, example 1A, US. B, again, having the most historically active volcanoes doesn't mean you have more eruptions, it just means they are active, but they don't always erupt. So you can't answer that question from the bar graph. So guided practice example 1, use the bar graph above about historically active volcanoes. And I don't think I have it again, so about how many historically active volcanoes does how many more does Chile have than Mexico? So let me see if I can go back. Chile than Mexico. I'm going to figure out how much each. Mexico has about, see that bar right there? It says about, so it's going a little bit higher than 30, and you know, from there to there is 60. I'm going to say Mexico is, I'm not sure what the book is going to say, but I'm going to say Mexico's around in a range of about 35. Chile, it's not quite 120, so let's call it 115. I don't know, that looks good. It says about how many more. So that tells us we subtract, so 115 minus 35, which I have to write them on top of each other like this. 0. 11 minus 3 is 80. And your numbers could be a little different because, you know, notice we did have to estimate. So the difference between those is about 80. So let's go, I don't think I have the answers on this one, so let me go ahead here. So we would say in this answer to this one, we would say 80 volcanoes. Okay, let's see what the next guided practice has us do. Reading graphs, basically. Oh, it does have the answer, about 80. Okay, that's good. Use the bar graph above about historically active volcanoes. So again, which country has the least number? Well, I'll go ahead and I won't go all the way back, but if you look in your book, which one is the smallest bar? And that one is Canada. So our answer to guided practice number 2 is Canada. So we just write that. About how many historic active volcanoes do Canada, Mexico, and the U.S. have altogether? Now notice they're saying about, because we don't know the exact number from the graph, so we kind of have to guess. Canada, you know, that's almost halfway between 0 and 30, maybe a little bit higher, but I think we could be all right by saying that Canada has about 15. And it's all together, so we add. Mexico we did before, remember we did about 35 for them, so we'll say 35. And the United States is up there between 150 and 180. What do you want to say? I'm going to say about 165. So when we add those together, 15 and 30 make, or 15 and 35 make 50, plus our, so about 215 active volcanoes, about somewhere around there. And as long as we're all close, you know, we're going to have a little bit different estimates when it comes to putting them, guessing on how tall the bars are, but we should be pretty close. And my book says 225, so I would say that we're really close in that neighborhood. I'll take it. All right, example number 2. Here's the frequency table, so we'll talk a little bit about it. These are, they do take a little bit of time, so and these have some really nice examples, so we'll go through it. Roller coasters. The data shows the heights in meters of some of the tallest roller coasters in the world. Make a frequency table of the data. So you're going to notice there's a lot of numbers right here, 66.4, 94.5, 68.3, and so on, all the way. Those are all numbers. They have commas in between them. It's a little tough to read, but you can see that. Now, if you were to make, you know, a bar graph it'd be crazy because you'd make a bar for this one, a bar for this one, a bar for this one. So what a frequency table does is it compiles the data into intervals. It puts it together. So it says choose intervals of equal size for the data. The intervals should include the numbers from 61.9 to 120.6. Now what are those numbers? That's the smallest number in the data. That's the largest. So that's the first thing you got to do when you make a frequency table is figure out what's my smallest number, that's where I'm going to start, and then what's my highest number. So we have those and we decide what is our interval going to be. We tally each one, so let's get to the table. So right here you'll notice we started, they just did them from 60 to 69.9, 70 to 79.9, and so on, all the way up. So you have the smallest number. The first interval includes the smallest one, and this last one includes the biggest one. You make tally marks, so you just go through where does the number fit. And then the frequency means how many tally marks were there. Notice there's 13, and there's 13 over here. So it works out good. Okay, there's 4 tallies, so you put 4. There's 0 tallies, so you put 0. 2 tallies, 2, and so on. That's a frequency table. So make a histogram of the data in the frequency table. So we have our horizontal and our vertical axis, which is our x-axis and our y-axis. And we'll draw the bar and we put a title. So notice right here, there's my title. All graphs have a good title. Here's my my horizontal axis. They put height, and notice these are those intervals that we came up with. You know, if we would have made a bar graph for each one of them, it would have been huge. So we have just these intervals right here, and then the roller coasters, there was none of them that went higher than 15, so that's as high as we needed to number. And then these, notice between 80 and 89.9, there were no roller coasters with that height. Also that one, because there's not a bar above it. That's a histogram. So what if, using the data from example 2, make a new frequency table using 6 intervals, then make a histogram from your frequency table. So if we go back to that old frequency table, notice it had, right here, it had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 intervals. It wants us to make one with only 6 intervals. So that means we got to make the numbers spread out just a little bit more, a little bit bigger intervals. So that's what they did, and they, there's lots of options. They just chose to go 60 to 71.9, 72 to 83, and these have to be the same. If you have 10 in between them, you do 10 in between each one. You can't just put whatever you want. You have to have the same size intervals for each of these. And there's the frequency. So this is your graph right here. This is going to be your x-axis or your horizontal axis, and this is going to be your y-axis or your vertical. And so when they make the histogram, check it out over here. There's my roller coasters. There's the number of frequency of roller coasters, and here are my intervals. So they do take a little bit of time to make. Okay, that's it. If you have any questions, we'll go over them if you do, and you can go ahead and start on your 1.1 assignment. See you next time.